Nathan Tankus is the publisher of Notes on the Crises and research director of the Modern Money Network. He has written for the Financial Times, Politico, Rolling Stone, and more. And he's currently working on a book under contract with Viking Press of Penguin. So welcome, Nathan.
Thank you very much for having me, Katie.
Of course. And right on time, you come in. And in case we didn't know you were in New York City, you got the sirens. So what is the crisis as you see it? Or what are the interconnecting crises as you see it?
Yeah, so I think there's the big picture globally, what is happening right now with the federal government as a whole and with the Trump administration and Elon Musk's DOGE, so-called Department of Government Efficiency. And then there is the specific crisis that I've been focusing on in my newsletter, which is specifically about the Treasury Department and specifically about a specific subpart of the Treasury Department called the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. The big picture is that the Trump administration and Elon Musk's DOGE are rolling through the federal government and basically firing whoever they can, getting access to all the information technology systems of various parts of the federal government with no regard to privacy laws or any other sort of restrictions of accessing very sensitive data. And so they are essentially trying to grab all of the sensitive data that they can, fire whoever they can, stop spending on whatever they don't want to be spent on, despite the fact that Congress has ordered this spending in what are called appropriations. And so this is a multi-layered crisis. One part of it is just stealing all of our information and using it against us for their own private purposes in terms of profit making potentially, or using it to just persecute people, and doing this under the cover of, essentially an anti-woke war, anti-DEI, anti-wokeness, anti-gender ideology, which are literally, in the title, like against gender ideology and for biological truth. And also, what they call the Green New Deal, which of course, no Green New Deal has passed, but what they mean is like the Inflation Reduction Act and anything being done on climate change. These are culture war framings that are just justifications for gutting the parts of the federal government, or really the whole federal government. They have felt that these executive orders give them the authority to, for example, fire tens of thousands of people and then going, oh crap, we didn't realize the agency where we were firing everyone literally looks over the nuclear stockpile. Let's try to find these people and hire them, but all their government emails are deactivated, so it's actually hard to contact them. Like this level of kind of just running roughshod through everything. There's some sort of ringing in the back of your head about the Constitution or the basic, what is called the separation of powers, is Congress passes bills and the presidency, the quote unquote executive branch, is supposed to execute those laws. The executive branch is claiming the authority that they get a kind of second bite at the apple and get to decide, well, we don't care if Congress passed, legislation, we get to decide spending, is a fundamental constitutional crisis. And you don't necessarily have to care about whether something's constitutional or unconstitutional. In this case, it is really bad because what this is the concentration of power in Donald Trump, apparently also Elon Musk, and away from even the courts, potentially, and maybe going much further, but also Congress, and thus the rest of us. We can say all sorts of problems with Congress, but it's a much worse situation when, we kind of have this full imperial presidency where the president, and in this case, Trump, gets to sort of decide what is happening in the federal government or not. And that is tremendously, tremendously concerning. And they're trying to do this in all sorts of ways. And my specific crisis, which I've been focused on, which I was extremely alarmed about as soon as the first murmurs of it emerged, was specifically wanting access to very sensitive systems in what's called the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And that matters because what the Bureau of the Fiscal Service does is process government payments. 88% of payments in the last fiscal year run through the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And so if you can get control, like operational control, quote unquote, of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, you don't actually have to kind of do the hard work of taking control and installing your flunkies in every single government agency and worrying about court orders and injunctions. You can just get in there and just literally say, hey, don't process payment files from that agency, which is what they did with USAID. And it doesn't say, like, love USAID or whatever, but that kind of power is extraordinarily dangerous. And they seem to be building that while still seemingly respecting the court injunctions, as far as we can tell, building an apparatus so that they can just kind of get to the point of kind of clicking buttons and, hey, I don't like anything being spent, any money being given to like this group that I don't like. And so I'm going to click a button and say no to that.
Right. It seems like there's a real misunderstanding on the part of a lot of people, I would say, where somehow like there's corruption in government and there's overreach committed by the government and there's power grabs committed by the government, but not by really smart dudes like Elon Musk. It's like all the nefarious motives that are sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly ascribed to government are never applied to individuals or corporations. But that's obviously not true. And I wanted to jump off with an article that you did, which is pretty fascinating. This piece in your newsletter is called, I asked former Bureau of the Fiscal Service employees to interpret an Elon Musk tweet. And let's take a look at this tweet. And sorry to put everyone through it. I'll read it out loud.
This is just one tweet.
Do we have to call them X's now or something now that it's X?
I will never. It's their tweets.
To be clear, what the DOGE team and U.S. Treasury have jointly agreed makes sense is the following. Require that all outgoing government payments have a payment categorization code, which is necessary in order to pass financial audits. This is frequently left blank, making audits almost impossible. All payments must also include a rationale for the payment in the comment field, which is currently left blank. Importantly, we are not yet applying any judgment to this rationale, but simply requiring that some attempt be made to explain the payment more than nothing. The do not pay list of entities known to be fraudulent or people who are dead or are probable fronts for terrorist organizations or do not match congressional appropriations must actually be implemented and not ignored. The above super obvious and necessary changes are being implemented by existing long-time career government employees, not anyone from DOGE. Yesterday, I was told that there are currently over $100 billion per year of entitlements payments to individuals with no social security number or even a temporary ID number. If accurate, this is extremely suspicious. When I asked if anyone at Treasury had a rough guess for what percentage of that number is unequivocal and obvious fraud, the consensus in the room was about half. So $50 billion per year or $1 billion per week. This is utterly insane and must be addressed immediately. Okay. So what is your response to this? And what were the responses of your sources? And explain to us who your don't tell us who your sources were, but explain to the extent that you can who they were.
Yeah. So, the first thing I want to start is there was a lot of detail in there. And I want to emphasize that just before you even get to the substance, the fact that he's tweeting about these topics is fundamentally insane. That's fundamentally insane. Circa 3 weeks ago, the amount of people who knew about the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, or what it did in even a one-sentence description of its job, was a small minority of people. And the amount of people who are actually have anything approaching expertise in what these systems are. To give you context, I have talked to deputy treasury secretaries, people who've worked on tax policy or debt management or whatever, and major parts of the government, and have gotten into some pretty minute details, and they had only the broadest conception of what the Bureau of the Fiscal Service did, because it was so technical and so outside of their purview. So the big context is a DOGE team, and specifically a certain person, Marko Elez, 25-year-old former employee of SpaceX, had been sent to the Bureau of the Fiscal Service to essentially commandeer it in the way that all sorts of different branches of government have been commandeered by DOGE teams with to say the least, very unclear legal authority. And specifically, he got what was called supposedly got what it was called, quote unquote, read-only access, which means he can look at anyone's information that are in these systems, which is a social security number of anyone who's ever received a government payment, from a tax refund to social security, from, SNAP, the works. We're talking already about like 100-something million social security numbers, sensitive bank account information, like anything that you would want to steal someone's identity. They were letting some like 25-year-old Nazi groyper rummage around in. Kind of justification.
Part of their DEI, like they need representation of Nazi groypers.
Yeah, diversity and equity and inclusion for Nazis. Like that is the DOGE program. What Wired came across from sources, and then also I came across from sources.
Fell asleep, Nathan. I know you fell asleep. They beat you by a couple of hours.
I woke up at 3:30, got it out by 7:30. They beat me by 6.5 hours. This went so rapidly that I even got to the point of being able to report on the effect of Wired and myself reporting and his access supposedly getting revoked. And then the details of that sort of like, oh crap reaction. And then ultimately, after a court injunction about his involvement in these systems, that Thursday morning, he resigned, supposedly over racist tweets. Again, the Trump-Musk administration has diversity, equity, inclusion for Nazis. It's not very believable that he would fire racist tweets. This was reinforced even further by, first Musk, then Vance, then Trump agreeing with Vance that he should be rehired. But him getting rehired back to DOGE didn't necessarily mean at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. So we had gotten, the Nazi out, and now there's a big injunction based on 19 state attorney generals suing. The reason that this was so concerning and why I put aside everything in my life to go write out piece after piece out of that is that I was fundamentally terrified that they were going to rummage around in the system and break it. And if they break it, that means no Social Security checks, no Medicare, no Medicaid, and like the sort of just the wheels fall off on our society pretty rapidly when they just don't know how to get government payments to the entities that need payments. And if you break that system, because we have starved government for decades and we haven't paid for, IT modernization or been reluctant to pay the full amounts that have been needed, our systems have been like legacy systems, but not because like government bureaucrats have been lazy about this. This has just been not funded. And so because it's not funded, it is a system that's very hard to change quickly. It's not a systems that we've invested in building redundancies into. And so they really could do something fundamentally that breaks everything. But the reporting has come out, like I mentioned, the USAID thing, that they're keeping very close focus on using the Bureau of the Fiscal Service to do impoundment. And that's why I focused in on this tweet, is he is doing a bunch of justifications which sound to the uninitiated about government efficiency and auditing, but what they actually are about being able to do impoundments. For example, what he calls a payment categorization code, which is not a term, there's a specific technical term, Treasury account symbol, where you can tie a specific payment to a specific kind of line item of appropriations. He wants to have like this system fully nailed down because he wants to just be able to like take the Treasury account symbols that he doesn't like and just kill the spending. And so one of the things that have already come out is they killed some refugee settlement money coming out of Health and Human Services based on its Treasury account symbol. And so this is just them going like, this is a type of thing that the government spends money on, and I don't like it, so I'll just kill it. It covered the administered costs of refugee resettlement of women and children, or maybe that it's involved in some larger kind of more nefarious activities of the federal government in terms of backing ethnic cleansing, for example, in other places. But the Musk-Trump, vision of what they want to do with these codes is to just delete any spending that has any sort of quote unquote lib coding or left wing or Marxist coding or whatever. And that means fundamentally trying to harm people. And this is also where this idea of a rationale comes in. You know, it might sound like it makes sense. Why shouldn't we just have a rationale on every payment? The rationale of these payments is that Congress appropriated the funds. Like, there was a budgetary process, there was, administrative or agency process of determining the internal controls. Like, him saying you should put a rationale on every single payment going out is basically the equivalent of anytime you swipe your credit card, you should have to write a rationale to your credit card company, and then they can decide that some of that is bad spending. The Bureau of the Fiscal Service is kind of just serving what I call like a payment intermediary. Fundamentally, like, the agencies are supposed to be the ones who check about whether you qualify for a certain type of spending, not at the payments level. And so this article, as the title says, is based on former employees in the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And one of them, I think, put it quite well when they said, Fiscal Service is never going to know whether someone needs a wheelchair or not. But if you're Elon Musk and you want a way to just sort of arbitrarily, capriciously hit a button and kill payments, that's actually a negative thing, because that's decisions that are not in your direct control. This is about him being able to pick and choose who deserves what spending, and making sure maybe SpaceX gets $5 billion more dollars,
while pretending just to be calling balls and strikes, right? Like that's
exactly.
What he's just a technocrat. He has no ideology. He has no skin in the game. I thought I came across an interesting tweet because I really do have a pet peeve when people believe people's claims about this just being about efficiency and not anything else, no ideology. And it's Richard Hanania, who's like an anti-woke right-wing kind
Nazi.
of ghoul. Yeah. He writes, DOGE is reportedly considering cutting DEI programs, which could save an estimated $125 billion a year. This is the easiest no-brainer of anything in the federal government. I'd be surprised if they didn't do it. And then Elon Musk tweets no-brainer. And then you take a look at what this really is. The DOGE stuff is so unserious. The no-brainer $125 billion savings includes $120 billion that are simply a goal of how much of its spending the government wants to contract to, quote, socially economically disadvantaged, unquote, small business. Sure, get rid of that if you want, but it saves $0. So just like one example of how this is nonsense dressed up as intelligence.
Yeah, I mean,
not even nonsense. It's more nefarious than nonsense. There's an agenda.
Yeah, there's an agenda, but also there is also just a stupidity to this.